If we keep going down this path, our kids and our grandkids will spend their whole lives not working to meet the challenges of the future, working to meet their priorities, but working to pay off the debts of their parents and grandparents. Our parents didn't do that to us. Their parents didn't do that to them. And you know what? We're all here tonight because we're not willing to do that to the next generation. So that leads to my second point. Growth is the answer. Growth, if there's one word every Republican should have tattooed on his head, it is growth. The book of Ecclesiastes tells us there's nothing new under the sun. I'm going to suggest the challenges we're facing right now are very, very similar to the late 1970s. This president is fond of saying he inherited the worst economy in the history of the universe. Doesn't seem to have a whole lot of historical memories. How many of y'all remember the late 1970s? You remember double-digit unemployment? 22% interest rates? Gas lines going around the block? Stagflation? Remember our hostages languishing in Iran for 444 days while the president wrung his hands, unsure of what to do? Yeah. The answer we saw in 1980 was a grassroots revolution. It was the Reagan Revolution. It was millions of Americans, many of the men and women in this room who stood up, who got involved and said, we're going to get back to the principles that made this nation. President Ronald Reagan came into office in 1981, elected this very same year. Chuck Grassley was elected to the U.S. Senate. And he implemented policies the exact opposite of those President Obama had. Instead of jacking up taxes by $1.7 trillion, he cut taxes and simplified the tax code. Instead of exploding spending in the national debt, he restrained the growth of federal spending. And instead of unleashing regulators like locusts to destroy small businesses, Reagan restrained federal regulation and turned. The result was some of the most incredible economic growth this nation has ever seen. By the fourth year of Reagan's presidency, 1984, anyone know what the rate of GDP growth was? 7.2%. What does that mean? What does that mean in practical terms? Well, if President Obama, coming into office, inheriting the same lousy economy that Ronald Reagan inherited, had implemented the same policy, and if those economic policies had produced the same economic growth, by today, we would have an additional 7 million new jobs. That is the equivalent of taking every single person who is unemployed in 46 of the 50 states and having a new job for each and every one. And growth is foundational to everything else. Every other challenge we have, whether it's unemployment, whether it's the national debt, whether it's maintaining the strongest military in the world, if we have growth, we can do all of it. And if we don't have growth, we can't achieve anything. Here's an interesting statistic. Do you know that an additional 1% economic growth produces over a decade an additional $2.8 trillion in tax revenues and $3.1 trillion in debt and deficit reduction? 1 stinking percent. That's a technical term, a stinking percent. That's what the Republican Party needs to be about. We need to be about economic growth all the time, every day. That's how we turn the country around. So how do we get it done? And that's my third point. Only the people can turn us around. I'm convinced we're facing a new paradigm in politics. It is a paradigm that is the rise of the grassroots. I got to tell you, it has official Washington absolutely terrified. But this new paradigm has been beta tested, unlike the Obamacare website. It was beta tested in 1980 with the Reagan Revolution, and we pulled this country back from the brink. And if you look at this past year, we have been seeing over and over and over again the power of the grassroots. One of the very first things I was proud to participate in the U.S. Senate this spring was standing side by side with my friend Senator Rand Paul in his epic filibuster against drones. Now, when that started, most of his colleagues in the U.S. Senate didn't understand what Rand was doing. They thought it was curious, quixotic, it didn't make any sense. And something incredible. We started to see people all over the country going online, going on Facebook, going on Twitter, speaking out and saying, defend our liberty, defend our constitutional rights. And as a result of y'all's leadership, as a result of the grassroots rising up, the next day, President Obama was forced to do what he had refused to do for 3 consecutive weeks, which is admit in writing the Constitution limits his authority to target U.S. citizens. We saw the new paradigm a second time on the battle over guns. Following the tragic shooting in Newtown, Connecticut, President Obama didn't come out as he should have, targeting violent criminals. And listen, I think violent criminals, we should come down on them like a ton of bricks. But instead, he chose to target the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens. And I got to tell you, conventional wisdom in Washington was this was unstoppable. Early on in those first few weeks, Chuck and I both sat in those lunches, and if that vote had happened early, it would not have been great. And once again, the same thing happened. Millions of Americans across this country began speaking up, began showing up at town halls when their senators came home, began lighting up the phone, began going on Facebook, going on Twitter, speaking out. The lead alternative to President Obama's Second Amendment infringing bill, the law enforcement alternative, was a bill that was entitled the Grassley Cruiser, that I was very proud to write side by side with your Senator Chuck Grassley in his office. It received 52 votes, the most bipartisan votes of any comprehensive bill concerning guns. 9 Democrats voted for Grassley Cruiser. But Harry Reid, the Democrats' filibustered it and prevented it from passing the law. But let me tell you something, even though Washington was convinced after Newtown nothing could stop the president's anti-gun agenda, when it came time for a vote, every single proposal of the president's that would undermine the Second Amendment was voted down on the Senate floor. That was the power of the grassroots. A third time we saw concerned immigration, where the president, along with Senate Democrats, made a push to grant amnesty to those here illegally and not to secure the border. And they pushed it through the Senate. They had the votes to push it through the Senate. But the American people rose up in overwhelming numbers and said, no, we don't support granting amnesty without securing the borders and solving the problem. And as a result, that bill went to the House of Representatives and has stopped because of the grassroots, because of you speaking out to your elected representatives.